Of course, they start cutting grass right when I start this, but hello, class. My name is Joshua Champagne, and today I want to speak to you about speech communities and give an explanation of what they are. Just a little brief little presentation of speech communities, their alternatives, and some examples pertaining to what speech communities actually are. At least some handpicked ones that I think kind of illustrate the point very well. So let's go to slide two. So, exactly what speech communities are, from what I understand from the book, there's a lot of ways to look at this topic. There's a lot of ways to define this specific topic from different points of views, from different linguistic anthropologists that have looked at it and tackled it. Predominantly with speech communities, we're looking at three specific aspects, and those aspects pertain to research from various linguistic anthropologists. So from Ahern's book, we're looking at defining a speech community, and specifically those three aspects that she lists include the size and location of the community. We're looking at the types of interactions between members of the community, and we're also looking at what's shared between these groups. And just to kind of go on a little bit about these three topics in general, when we're talking about size and location, we're looking at size being anything from family members, a couple, small gatherings of maybe five or six, but we're also looking at maybe nations, we're looking at states, we're looking at sort of maybe government collectives, we're looking at any sort of number. And that's why it's a little bit difficult to define it based on size and location, according to Ahern, because how do you really determine the size of this community? What facilitates or what really illustrates the idea of size? Location as well. You have location in terms of online communities. We can meet online. There's chat rooms. We have Discord. Back in my day, we had a AOL Instant Messenger where you could have two, three, or more people in the same chat room, chit chatting, having a good old time. That's another aspect between where people are meeting, online versus in person, face to face communications. And then our third aspect of what's shared between members. So we're looking at essentially the types of speech or the type of portrayals of speech that we want to kind of constitute in these groups. So we're looking specifically in terms of what's shared as language, or more so, as you'll see as we go along, social interactions. Now, to flesh it out even further, initially this concept was identified by Saussure and Bloomfield. If I'm saying Saussure's name correctly, he'll have to forgive me, in 1916. And this was thoroughly fleshed out through the 60s and into the 90s. And they saw more of a deviation away from Chomsky and Saussure, going further as they dug into this. So Himes, through his book Foundations of Social Linguistics, it was extremely pivotal in defining this. And again, we're looking at kind of threes in a sense, but we're defining further what what speech communities were through values, ways of speaking, and attitudes. And it further tied that towards social interactions, the interactions that eventually came together to form the speech and community aspects of this. So Gumprez, I believe is how you pronounce that name, moved the idea of speech communities towards the idea of an aggregate. And so you're looking at modern nations, interaction between in more face-to-face situations, pertaining this to groups like gangs, church congregations, which is what we're going to touch on in this particular presentation, and furthermore, just sort of a cohesion by social norms. Now, Gumprez again talks of a verbal repertoire, although the repertoire does not require that language be the same, essentially saying that in this groups are going to speak the same sort of words, not through a unified language and not through even a certain style or dialect. This is just stuff that's agreed upon, that's spoken regardless of the language used. You'll have, which is basically language ideology. It's essentially the group must agree on social norms of language that is considered acceptable within the group in order to ascertain membership. And group members must have a consistent and often interactions. So these group members, they have to be meeting. There has to be reason and rhyme behind these interactions, and meeting essentially creates these groups in, once again, that social aspect that we're trying to continue with and drive home here. So an alternative view, well, I looked at a paper titled Communities by Marcelina Morgan, and some of her points to sort of continue to drive home the point. Speech communities are maintained by discursive practices, and these discursive practices are basically social interactions that pertain to kind of tying social interactions with language. So what people know, what they do, how they interact, and based on and needed and agreed upon social norms of a particular group. So this is wholly different from the work of Bloomfield, who postulated that speech communities have to share within a single group one language that is entrenched within the group. This is sort of the shifting we're getting away from these original ideas that were formulated. And by sharing a local knowledge, is how she termed it, these groups further define themselves and draw distinctions between people who do not belong to the group, further giving us definition and those alternative views I mentioned beforehand. Now, communities of practice is another alternative view, and this was coined by Wegner and Leviev, I believe is how you pronounce the name, in their book Situated Learning, Legitimate Peripheral Participation. Bleh. So social practice is the idea that learning is derived from both inside our heads, but also is connected to our social interactions. So once again, we're looking at three main aspects here. And that is a shared repertoire, very similar to the previous slide, a shared engagement, and joint exercise. Now, the shared engagement and the joint enterprise, being, further fleshing out this idea of communities of practice. So it's basically constructed of power relations, beliefs in how people talk, and their shared values. You'll continuously see this theme of shared social norms, but this kind of fleshes this out a little more. And this method looks, I'm blocking it, but this method looks at social engagement more so rather than someone's age, ethnicity, their sex, or any sort of descriptive things we may have associated to people. We're looking at exactly the engagement themselves, not the people participating in the actual engagement. So outside of that, I wanted to give some examples of these concepts, just some real world ideas, some communities that I'm a part of, and kind of how that illustrates the point that I'm speaking about today. And firstly, I want to start with the Catholic faith. Particularly, I want to look at the Mass. I had originally ideas of looking at the Knights of Columbus, and I kind of want to associate that with this idea of speech communities as well. So in the faith, you're looking at the three aspects. We're looking to look at grumpets and hymns associated with the Catholic Mass. So that verbal repertoire they talked about, which I'm utterly slaughtering that word, progression of the Mass through performance between priest and congregation. So essentially, if you were to enter a Mass and you had absolutely no idea what the heck is going on, and you're hearing these people say these terms and these words and these sayings, and you hear in the beginning of the Mass, the priest will issue, "The Lord be with you," and the congregation will respond, "And with your spirit," you will have absolutely no idea what they are talking about. And this is sort of that verbal repertoire. This is that sort of response as the performance goes on. In order for the Mass to be conducted properly, there are agreed social norms and agreed verbiage that is used in order for the Mass to continue. Now, the interaction, you have the congregation gathers to celebrate Mass during your Sunday obligations, but also other days of obligation, collectively with one's chosen parish, yet all Catholics practice this throughout the world on the same day of said obligations. So we're seeing this concept of the language doesn't matter in terms of it being a shared, unified ideal. The same things are being said at Mass, but it's not in the same language. Of course, here we're having it in English, and in Italy, Italian, France, French, and so on and so forth. But those words, regardless of the language, is still being used throughout the congregation. So again, agreed upon languages. Masses are said in various languages, yet the words are the same. And we're looking at hymns here. Social aspects are obvious that meeting in the church is necessary for the Mass to be legitimate and is always meant to be a face-to-face interaction. Sorry, they're cutting grass in the background. And basically, this is social rather than linguistic entity, is a quote from him. Now, we're looking at this essentially as the interaction is the most important degree, because the mass really doesn't take place without people being there. A priest can do a mass alone, but it really doesn't facilitate the mass as a whole towards the congregation. So, continuing on, I wanted to bring up, I know I probably talked about this various times through my new college career, but we're looking at pipe smokers as communities of practice. Specifically, I'm looking at it in the Wenger, point of view. So we're looking at this through, again, more aspects. We're looking at the gatherings of many people, and this is regardless of their creed, their race, their ethnicity, their sex, faith, all based around social interactions of an actual object. We're looking at the action of smoking a pipe, and this draws all kind of different people together, regardless of background, in order to participate in this particular action. So that joint enterprise, you're collectively gathered for the sake of smoking a pipe with like-minded hobby enthusiasts. We're not really looking at the attributes of the groups or the people associated with the groups. We're looking at what the group is doing. So that mutual engagement comes into play. All participate in a singular act through the collective. The primary code of membership is just enjoying smoking a pipe, but also conversation had. And again, this is various people coming together who made different languages, but the idea of is the camaraderie that you have associated with smoking a pipe. And there's agreed upon social norms when you're doing this. It's a very gentlemanly thing to do. I rarely see women smoke. Sorry, ladies, it's not to push you out of the way or anything like that, but I just rarely see women smoke. Although a while back there was a lady who did smoke a cigar, and she fitted in just fine. It was fantastic to see. So you also have that shared repertoire. I wanted to include the word lunting, and lunting is essentially just a word that means you're smoking while you're walking. And you'll see this through maybe online forums where pipe smokers gather and kind of speak about the idea of lunting together. And there's other various words and phrases that's used. You may hear in tobacco reviews, smoke down to a fine white ash is kind of a way of signifying that a blend smokes really well. It's really delicious. I had to have it all. Couldn't stop smoking it. That type of thing, and other various terminologies that are associated, as well as actions with the pipe, and then sort of words that identify pipes based through grain structure and whatnot. All of this is in people's heads. It's the collective gathering, and this is known information from the group, and you can distinguish non-members of this group by people just having, a degree of ignorance towards these concepts. And this is just my quick sources, of course, Living Language Ahern, as well as Marcelina Morgan's article that was so kindly given to me by Professor Managi of Community, which was helpful for my information. And that is all. Thank you for your attention, dealing with my rambling, the grass cutting, and all the various silliness that may have been associated with this video. Have a good day.